What's up, guys? My name is Darryl Williams, and welcome back to another episode of the Church Hurt Podcast. On this podcast, we interview people that have experienced church hurt, who left and have come back to the faith, and we discuss their stories on why they left and how they remain in the church today. And like I mentioned last week, before we get into the episode, I'm hosting solo dolo for the next foreseeable future. My co-host Melissa has decided to step back from hosting, but she's still here handling the back end of the podcast and running the social media and the YouTube channel. So it would just be me. So please keep watching, like and subscribe. And now we're going to jump into our episode today and introduce our special guest, Patsy Lopez, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona.
Yes, correct.
Patsy,
Hi.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for flying all the way out here to New York City.
Oh, no. Thank you for making it possible. I was really excited to get out of my quarantine, or not quarantine. I was just on bed rest for a while. I just had surgery, and so it kind of all just worked out. And it's crazy that even in everything, in the most minuscule thing, God is just in the midst of it all
and working it out.
Yeah,
I'm glad I changed my mind. I was like, hey, would you be willing to come out to New York? Because I really don't like doing the Zoom or the virtual recording. So if people are willing to fly out to New York City and do the podcast, is really awesome. Is this your first time here?
It is my first time here. It's always been a bucket list for me in New York, and it's never really worked out. I don't think I've ever really set my mind to actually coming, but I love that that I'm here for the first time. Yeah. And that it's something that I feel passionate about, and that it is something to do with the ministry.
That's awesome. Look at that. The Church Hurt Podcast, fulfilling dreams. New York, people coming to New York City for the first time. Have you done anything since you've been here? Anything exciting?
I took a nap.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. I took a nap, and yep, I'm here.
Okay. Well, you're here until Sunday, so you have today, tomorrow to get some stuff done. I recommend that you check out Soho if you want to go shopping. Okay. Great food in Soho as well. Also Midtown, Central Park, if you can try. It's a lot to do in such a short amount of time, but hit the highlights, go to the High Line. That's worth seeing before you go back to Arizona.
Nice.
But yes, let's jump into this. So you're on this podcast today because you experienced some form of church hurt. But before we dive into that, we always like to take it back to the beginning. So kind of tell us about Patsy Lopez. What's the genesis of Patsy Lopez? Childhood.
So I think it all starts with my parents. My mom, she didn't grow up Adventist. She did come into the church in middle school, and then she went to college. She had a boyfriend, but then she didn't want to get married, and so she left. And fast forward, she leaves the church, she meets my dad, and then they come back into the church because my dad wanted to go to church, not my mom. So I always have thought that that's very interesting that my dad not have known really much of the church. He's the one that wanted to come.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so he's dragging my mom, and then fast forward maybe 10 years, they have me. And so I was born and raised inside the church, and honestly my earliest memories probably don't start up until maybe 9 years old. I know I was in Pathfinders, I know I was in Adventures because there's pictures, but I don't remember. My parents did separate at a very young age, and so I think that impacted a lot of just my memory and just how trauma relates to the brain and what you hold and retain. So 9 years old, my dad comes back. I remember really loving the church. He was actually deported to Mexico, and I remember going to Mexico and really loving the youth there, not liking the youth back at home in Phoenix, because it was just different. The vibe was different, the worship was different, and you can just tell that the youth really wanted to be at church. And so I always looked forward to the trips that I would be able to make to go down to Mexico and visit my dad. And then I guess this hurt with the church, it all starts really when my dad passes away, suddenly when I'm 11 in 2012. And just already coming from like the separation of my parents that was so public in the church, because my dad was like, he was like a Bible worker. And so that was just really out there and really open. And then him passing away was also, it was very close to the passing of another youth member in the church. And I'm not saying that, like, obviously it's not a competition over who matters most when it comes to passing or birth or whatever. Yeah. But I'm like at 12 years old, I did feel like there wasn't an importance, or like no one really cared for my hurt or my loss, as opposed to the other family. And I love the other family and respects to them, obviously, and the person that passed away. But I think in the moment at 12 years old, I just didn't. I was more worried, or like I guess I was sad with like, well, who's paying attention to my pain and who's addressing mine. And I remember asking my mom for like therapy or like psychologist or just whatever, and I don't think she meant to brush it off. I think parents they do the best they can with what they know. And so in that moment, she would just like brush it off and be like, well, you're fine. Like, this is just new. Like, it's recent. Like, give it a couple of years or not. She didn't say that, but that's eventually what it took.
Yeah, a couple of years. Wow, you said a lot there. So let's sort of go back and unpack a little bit of that. So your mom yourself didn't grow up in a religious home. She met your dad. He wanted to go back to church, and it was the Adventist church specifically that they started going to and that you were raised in. And then they separated. Was that because he got deported? Is why this separation?
No, they separated because my dad committed adultery with a social worker. I've always thought that was like a super like nice like thing to throw in there. It's like a social worker, like
that was helping him to stay in the U.S.
No, I just feel like social workers, like, you're supposed to help
people and not destroy them.
Yeah, not destroy families, and here you are destroying mine.
Okay, got you. And that became a public thing in
the church. Yeah, just because he was very well liked in the church, within pastors and members, and just my family made it. I guess with how my mom relates to stories, my family made it very like clear that they sided with him in the sense of like, I guess, custody and her not letting us like see him. And so that all went into the church just because, I mean, it takes a village to raise kids. So.
Got you. So in the midst of all of that happening, what was your earliest view of God? Like, what was your view of God growing up in 9, 11, doing Pathfinders, doing adventures, going to church? Dad's a Bible worker, but then this thing happens. Like, how did that shape your view of God?
I think, like, everyone maybe at that age, like, you know of God and you know that Jesus exists and he died on the cross for you and you know Jesus loves me. But I don't think it was until I was older that I realized that my view of him was very absent. Like, I knew of him, but I didn't know him in like my life. I felt like he was just the same image of as my dad, like leaving his family and then passing away, like the same thing. That fatherly figure was just always absent.
So even while your mother and father were together and your dad was a Bible worker, you still didn't have a close relationship, and you kind of...
Well, I was 3 when they separated, so I don't like really remember like that period. And then like up until like when I do remember my childhood, they were already separated.
And that has impacted your view of God. God felt absent from you. God felt separated from you, not a close, loving father.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that happens. You're growing up with this view of God. Now let's fast forward maybe a couple years. Like, what's life like growing up after your parents is separated, this view of God is formed? What is high school, college like in your faith walk?
Well, I think that's when I actually start to be a little bit more interested in church. Right around that time, like with Pathfinders, I think that was like my pivotal point with really lunging into church and wanting to be active. I'm sure that there was a youth director that was brought to Arizona, and he just, I don't know, just something about his personality just really drew me to Pathfinders. The people that I had at my church really drew me to Pathfinders. I remember there was a camporee, and it was right before my dad was deported, and it was we were camping, and it was at night, and we were singing "How Great Is Our God," and I just remember looking up at the sky and seeing all these stars and just asking God, like, well, if you're real, like, show me, like, make me feel something. And I just remember feeling this just peace, like this serenity that it's very hard for it to come by nowadays. But I've always held that memory very close to my heart, just knowing that, like, at that young age, I know that searching for God has always been a goal of mine. It's just been hard with so much like input from other people or from other moments in life.
Okay. What do you mean that input from other people? Like,
So then yeah, fast forward high school, you know, I had a boyfriend. I was 13 when we started dating. So I really had no business having a boyfriend. But my mom knew, he wasn't like overage, so it was fine.
Right.
But it definitely did get to a point where we weren't doing things correctly upon, I guess you could say, the eyes of God or our parents, you know, the respectful way. Like, I will admit that, you know, it's hard to like own up to it, but you have to take accountability for your actions. And so I guess fast forward to that, like, church just was very always interested in what we were doing and who we were with, and if my mom knew or if his parents knew. And so that was
Did he go to the church as well?
Yeah, he does.
So did you go to an Adventist Christian school or?
I did. Yeah, I grew up in the Adventist Christian school, and you know, it's like the same 15 people throughout like all
your
of
whole
your
life?
school age.
Okay, so you were in that environment from the time you were a child. So middle school, elementary, middle school, high school, all Adventist school. So around that time, still, did you have a boyfriend? You're still in church. You're calling out to God. You're searching for Him. Did that ever get to a point where you're like, okay, I feel like I have a close walk with God, or?
No. I think in high school was when I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel, I guess, love or an acceptance from a father, which was something that has always been like missing in my life, I feel like, up until that point. And so no, I actually attempted suicide at, I think I was 16.
Oh, wow.
And even then, that was very upsetting to have to get to that point for my feelings to be taken seriously or for my hurt to be taken seriously. Like, I'm not joking. Like, I've asked for therapy. I've asked for help.
To your mother?
My mother, yeah. Counselors and school counselors, and it was just always kind of like, well, you're fine, like your grades are good, you know, you're a bubbly person, you have friends, you're active in church, you're okay.
That's unhelpful. You know, for sure, because I was reading something on social media the other day, and it was like the most bubbly people you see could be the ones struggling the most internally. Like, you think about Twitch, you know, who seemed happy, bubbly, or the guy from Ellen, and you know, he committed suicide. So it's like, you can't really base that off of what's happening internally. Right. And then it's even more saddening when you're in the church and when you have a whole book called Lamentations and a whole book called Psalms, where it's nothing but feelings and lamenting and crying out to God, but people brushing it off as if you were fine. And I guess how did that make you? But even growing
up, I never knew that was an option. I always was told that, like, well, you need to have more faith. Because your lack of faith is why you're struggling, or why could you possibly be struggling at 16 years old? Like, you have no worries, and I'm over here dealing with like the greatest depression of my life. Well, I have struggles. They're just not the same as a grown adult.
But it's a struggle nonetheless, and shouldn't be invalidated because of your age. So, like, even though you're crying out to your mom and counselors, they're all that drove you to attempt.
That drove me even further, I think, from the church, and consequently even further from reaching out to God, because I get in that moment, or growing up, I thought, well, the people at church equal God. Or like what they say is God, and like that's why we're in the church, like, because.
So when you say the people, you mean like the pastors and the elders and the deacons, like they were kind of speaking on the behalf of God. So what they say kind of like, that's what kind of church was this? I'm curious. Was it more of a lean legalistic, more,
you know,
traditional?
I think this is traditional, like at least. Because we moved around churches a while growing up. We went to like 3 different churches that I could remember. And they were all the same. I got all the same like stuff. Like, well, you can't show your shoulders up on the pulpit. You can't wear makeup. You can't paint your nails, whatever. And so it was nothing like too overly strict, but I guess just traditional and
Mm-hmm.
Hispanic, and so it is a little bit more conservative. And I think
Yeah, yeah.
that in the Hispanic culture, I do think that most members are brought into the church as opposed to like second or third generation. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think a lot of it is like, oh, well, you have to stop drinking, you have to stop dressing this way, you have to stop all this and like leave like your world life behind. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're so focused with like, well, we have to stop doing this in order to receive God's like favor or
Yeah.
something. At least that's how I see it from the outside in.
That's interesting because you're saying like you didn't even know like counseling or therapy or these things was an option. And I'm thinking about you're what, 22? That was like 6 years ago. So it's kind of a wild thing to think about. I will say though, I will give the church some credit that they're starting to open up
Yeah.
more into these
Yeah.
in the Adventist church, and offering counselors, or if you need to talk to someone, giving resources. So like, but I think again, there's different pockets of churches all over the country, and everyone is doing their own thing, or like, no, this is the way. And then I grew up in a Caribbean background, so I know they're just as conservative and strict as the Hispanic religious individuals. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with you, like go pray, go read your
Yeah.
Bible, you don't have
Yeah.
enough faith, like
Yeah.
you're not sick in the head, like so it's just like it's
Yeah.
all these things. And there's a lot of cultural thing that gets brought into faith that are not necessarily biblical.
Yeah.
But can you talk about the day or the moment that led up to you like attempting that, and then like what prevented you from going through with it?
Well, that day it was a fight. It was a fight with my then boyfriend, and
The same one that you started dating at 13?
yeah, the
Oh, wow.
same one. No, we dated for on and off for like a span of 8 years.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
this is like all of like my early teens to like early adulthood.
Okay.
And so it was a fight, and like now thinking back on it, it's like, well, I don't want to minimize my own pain, but at the same time, it's like, Patsy, like that was not the reason, or that wasn't like I guess a good enough reason, but I know it wasn't the root of my pain.
Yes.
Yeah, I
I
think
see what you're
in that moment, it was just like, this is it. Like, you're 16, you think it's like the end of the world.
Honestly, when you're a teenager,
Yeah.
everything feels
Yeah.
like magnificent,
Yeah.
when you're that age.
Yeah.
Everything's the end of the world.
So I think it had been a couple things just like
Yeah.
piling up, and I thought, this is it. Like I can't
Mm-hmm.
take this pain. I don't know what to do with it. I'm not getting the help that I think that I need. And so I went into my mom and I's bathroom. We shared a room at the time, and I looked for pills. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that they probably couldn't have harmed me. that was like the first thing that came to my mind. This is what I'm going to do. And well, my mom ended up finding me, and I remember her just like running to me and making me throw up, and then eventually having to go to the hospital, and then having the pastor come over and like pray for my feelings and pray that
Pray for your feelings.
and it's just like, well, why are you here now? Like,
Yeah,
I didn't really need you now. Like,
Mhm.
you didn't have to wait until I didn't want to be here anymore.
What did your mother say to you after that? Did she say, "I'm sorry for not listening to you," or like did she acknowledge?
I think she acknowledged in her own way. I then started going to therapy.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm sorry never really came about, and I think that's like a whole other topic in of itself. Therapy has thankfully like helped me overcome that of like, well, she never did, but I know she did what she could and what with how she knew to do so. Praise Jesus that I'm still here and somehow he's like still working through me. So
Yeah. So how did therapy help then did it help just your mental wellness, or did it help your spiritual life? Did you get some clarity on? You're 16 still, so we still have a few years up before you actually left the church. So like, what was that period from therapy till, I guess, up until 2021, I believe it was? Yeah.
No, I think it was just helping like my mental state and just like easing that and helping a lot of like childhood wounds, and then my father's passing and just coming to terms with that type of stuff. And I'm a very hard-headed person, not to say that because of that I deserved what comes next, but in one of those, it was 2018, we were out of high school. A friend had moved to one of our colleges down in Tucson, and so two of us from Phoenix, we drove down to Tucson to meet up with her and have fun, at least what we thought would be fun, I ended up being sexually assaulted that weekend. And
At a party?
Yeah, it was like
Okay.
a small house party. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's when, like, for me, at least, like, the church hurt, like, builds up more.
Mm-hmm.
I was sexually assaulted. My friends didn't, like, believe me. They thought I was lying, that I was making it up.
Your friends from church, or was this like a church, like a party or gathering of people from church?
There were friends that I had made at, like, in high school.
In high school, right.
Which was an Adventist school, but
right.
I mean, now they're not in church, and I don't know, like, how they, like, live. But in that moment, it was just a lot. And I remember that was in August. In December, I had gone to Mexico. I lose my purse. I did leave. I did start taking birth control, and I did leave with condoms in that purse. Yeah. And I say that because then when I lose my purse, a lady from church goes through it and then takes it to the church board.
No.
And is saying that, well, I'm on birth control, or I had condoms because I was having, like, premarital sex with my boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And which, like, she wasn't wrong, like, I was, but I didn't start taking them, nor was I carrying them because I was. Mm-hmm. In my mind, somehow I thought, well, I've already been, like, sexually assaulted once. If this happens again, I'm on birth control. Mm-hmm. So, there's no, like, unwanted pregnancy. And, well, the first time there was no condom. And so this time it's like, I can at least, like, tell him I have a condom. So just whatever. Mm-hmm. Obviously not, like, the most sane thing. I don't even know how that thought process really came about. But that's, I think, what bothered me the most, that she felt it was in her, like, right to go through my stuff and then still go take it to the church board.
Yeah, why that's confused. Sorry. Listen, first of all, I want to acknowledge, I'm sorry that you were assaulted and that happened. And I assume that was not your boyfriend.
No.
Okay, got you. Were you still dating him at the time? Did
no,
you know about this?
We were like split up at the time. Yeah.
Okay. Why did she take it to the church board? Were you on the board of the church? You were just a member. And
I was just a member, and I think with this particular church member, there's always been just, like, a rift between her, more so her and my mom. Yeah. And so it just kind of, like, trickles down to me. It's such a crossing of boundaries, right? Because it's like, sure, what you were doing was wrong. We can acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't give her, who's doesn't really have a good relationship with you, not close to you, not a mentor, not your mother, to take it, go through your stuff, and then bring it to the church board to then shame you and embarrass you for the things you already know, probably in your heart. Hey, I probably shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. But I have some pain and some issues that I'm going on, so I'm going to continue to pursue this way. So, like, what was the fallout from that? Like, when your mom found out, or the church board? Like, what was did you go to church back after that? I did. I actually,
that's wild.
I still kept going to church after that. My mom knew, pretty soon after that happened, that it had, and that I was going to start taking birth control, and that I carried them. So, like, sorry, woman, like, my mom knew, joke's on you. But,
okay, so your mom already knew what was happening with you and your
she already knew what was happening, and she wasn't okay with it. But for me, it was like, well, my mom knows, and that's really, like, I'm 18 at the time. That's really all who I, like, deserve to give answers to. Yeah.
Did your mom confront the woman? It's like, why did you do that to embarrass my daughter? Like,
she did, and so that was. It's also, like, very known that they don't work well together in, like, departments. And so, but my thing was, the church board never asked me why I was taking them. So they don't know. Like, they'll know now if they
watch this podcast.
Yeah, if they're watching, yeah. But they never asked me, like, well, why are you taking them? Or why is this in your purse? Or whatever, And to me, it's like, well, if you really would care, and if it's something that really would bother you, or, like, it's a young member of your church, like, if you were so worried with them not following the right steps, you would ask them. You would bring them to the board, you would, or just
I don't even
approach them.
think you would bring it to the board. It's not even
Right.
necessary.
But I mean, we're already at the board.
Well,
so,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
if you really wanted to, like, you
True.
could bring me to the board or just approach me.
Right,
You
and
could
have a
just
private
asked
conversation. It's like, hey, Patsy, I saw this. Like, what's going
Yeah.
on? You anything you want to talk about? That would have been the right approach, not
Yeah.
just bring you to the board, and then now board members are looking at you sideways on Sabbath.
Yeah,
It's like,
well,
that's
actually,
Patsy. Stay away from her.
It was a whole, like, sermon after that. A little bit after that, there was a whole sermon about we were actually going to, like, dismember a person. We were, like, voting for a totally different topic.
Okay.
Yeah,
But you weren't the person.
No, I wasn't
Okay,
the person.
okay.
No, but then in that topic, it just went back to, like, well, I know we have some young couples that, well, some of them are engaged, some of them aren't, but the purpose is for you guys to become engaged so that we're not living sinful lives. And
Oof,
so
he's just calling you out.
it felt like
it.
it was just, like, spotlights on me
Yeah.
and my then boyfriend. And so it was a very, like, yeah, it was a very embarrassing moment that Sabbath, just because, I mean, I
bet.
felt like everyone knew that I was carrying this stuff. I mean, I'm sure, like, people assume or they think, right? But then now with, like, the pastor outright just, like, having a whole sermon on it, like,
Yeah, and like just you in the pews with your heads down. Because,
Yeah,
Damn, I need to
yeah,
leave. No,
yeah.
that's crazy. I think there are ways to handle things, and we talked about it. Like you pull someone aside. I don't think there's ever a reason to, when something's happening privately, for you to bring it to the board when it's a single person. There's a difference between
Yeah.
if a board member or a leader in the church is committing adultery with a deaconess and
Yeah.
in open sin about that. That's a different topic. And 1 Corinthians 5 speaks about that, like the man who was sleeping with his father's wife, right? That blatant open sin, that it's in the open, so you deal with it in the open. But in the situation of someone who's 18, you're still forming your identity, you're going through all these things, that's something you take them aside and you talk and you disciple them, you know, and you try to work with them and mentor them through this. But that's a way to quickly sabotage someone's relationship. I'm surprised you still went to church after that. Like, honestly, that's
me too.
that's really big of you to do that and then sit through a sermon where you kind of subliminally kind of giving you a jab, and it's just like, did you still go to church after that sermon?
I did. Yeah. So, you know, like I said, I'm very stubborn. Like, that didn't really, like, push me away. I still kept going. I got, like, my ears pierced, like, around the same time, and so that was also, like, a topic of.
They didn't boot you out after that?
No, but they would come sit next to me if I would, like, go and participate on the pulpit. They'd come sit next to me, like the diaconisa. I don't know how to say that in English, and she'd just go like this, like my hair.
Take
like,
it off?
No, she'd just be like, "Oh, you look so pretty today," just to make sure I didn't have them on. And so, because at that point,
That's wild.
at that point, I would take them off to go to church out of respect for my mom and out of respect for the type of congregation that they are. But now I don't.
Right, so you got
Yeah,
like hairpin, not hairpin.
Yeah.
What is that?
They're safety pins.
Safety pins in
Yeah,
your ears.
yeah.
Okay, interesting. Anyways.
Yeah, so that's what they
Yeah.
would do, and no, like I don't. That's never what really
Okay.
got me to stop going.
There's a lot happening in your story here, and I feel like it's building to something. So, what was that then event, that thing that happened that then pushed you out of the church? For real.
So then, fast forward a good chunk. I'm like 21.
Okay. So this is like a year ago, because you're.
Yeah, well, it was like the end of 2020 going into. No, I was 21. Okay, so no. For legal matters, 21, end of 21 and going into 2022, my boyfriend and we had really tried to refrain from like premarital sex and like, we're gonna do this the right way. Like, no, like I'm done. I don't want to have this over my head. Like, I want to have one less thing to worry about when it comes to my relationship with God.
Yeah.
And so that was just like the one that I was willing to like, okay, like, you know, we were already talking about marriage. We were talking about settling down, and you know, I really felt like I was like getting all my ducks in a row, and I was like committing to God. Like, okay, God, like I hear you, I see you, I want to commit myself to you. And then my then boyfriend, he decides to leave to study to Mexico, just go to Mexico,
just like, hey.
Yeah, it really was like end of July. He was like, okay, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I'm going to go study in Mexico.
So he didn't bring it to you before to talk about it. He just made
why
the decision.
Would he?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
was that his way of trying to end the relationship?
I know it was his way of avoiding commitment.
Okay.
I don't think necessarily the relationship. We still kept dating afterwards, but that's what was my breaking point. That I felt like I had turned things over to God, and I was praying about things like fervently, and I was serious. And here, my boyfriend is at the time leaving to Mexico, so it felt, and his whole thing was, well, I feel like God's calling me to go to Mexico. And so here it's like, well, it's God's doing, if God's calling me, then like, it's God's fault you're leaving.
Right. Okay.
And so that's when it really was like, well, God, like, I guess it did feel, up until then, my relationship with him did feel transactional. Where like, well, I'm doing things right. You're supposed to like pan out my life with how I want it to be. Not how you want it to be, but how I want it to be. And it didn't, and I was very upset. So I turned to drinking, I turned to partying, and I'm pretty sure I was like borderline like alcoholic at like the peak of it. And so that's what what drove me out.
All right, so let's just back up a little and unpack some of that. So you're like, all right, God, we're gonna try to do things right. We're not gonna have sex. We're gonna plan to get married. Like I'm trying to get my ducks in a row. Because this is what you want, and you're gonna bless me and flourish me because of these things, right? And then your boyfriend's like, I'm out, deuces, and then that you reflect that back on God, because you feel like I was doing these things so that it can be right in your sight. And I'm expecting blessings. And I think, that's tough, right? Because I think a lot of times as believers, especially when we're young, we kind of view God that way. It's like, if I'm in the right and I'm doing these things, then things should go well for me. And if they don't, then what's the point of doing these things? And then, like you mentioned, you had a transactional relationship. You didn't actually really want God's hand on your life. You wanted God's hand of approval on the plans that you made.
Well, I thought what I wanted was also what God wanted.
We make a lot of assumptions.
It wasn't. So
yeah, and trust me, I can relate to that. In my life as well, when like 2018, young professional, trying to figure out what to do in life, like there's areas of my life that I kept back from God as well. It's like, I want to choose my career. Like I want to date who I want to date. Like I stayed away from girls in the church because I was out here doing foolishness, right? So I was like, I want to keep these areas of life to myself, but there was never any, but you still want God to bless things for you, but that's just not how life works. And when things don't work out, then you try to, okay, I'm gonna do this, this, and this, and God, please bless these efforts. And then when it doesn't happen, then you start thinking like, what's the point of that? And I think that's a lesson for a lot of people that's watching. You might have had that same view, and because in the way you may have been raised in church, sometimes if you could tend towards legalism, then you view God as transactional. It's like, if I obey these points of the law, then blessings should come from it, and no, negativity should come to in my life. Because what if that happens, and especially if you went through what you've gone through in your walk, and you're like, all this has happened because I haven't been following God, If I do, then things should go well, and then this kind of pushes
like
you.
A switch. It should have, at least in my mind at that point, it was like, it should have been a switch.
Yes.
It's like, well, now I'm listening. Now I'm, doing what I'm supposed to be. And
But instead, it pushed you out. So talk to me about that period of life. Because you were like, you said, what, 6 months? This is probably the shortest span that we've had on this podcast.
Yeah.
So what was that 6 months of life like when you're like, okay, I'm just going to drown out God, if you will?
Yeah. I think I was just tired. I was just tired of going to church and kind of just being like observed fully, and like what I'm wearing, if my earrings are in or not, if I wore pants or not, if I wore a dress or not. And I was just tired of it. And then a big thing of it was I felt shame, because I knew that what I was now doing wasn't right, and I didn't want to face God. I didn't want to come to church and like have to, I guess, look at him in the eye and be like, well, Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm drinking, but then Saturday morning, I'm still here. Like, I'm not supposed to be here. But then, like, later what I did learn is that, well, I can still be here, even if I'm struggling, even if, like, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be. I still have every right to be here because I am your daughter. But at the beginning of, at the end of 2021, it was, I couldn't step into church. It was hard to receive the comments of, oh, well, we haven't seen you in a while. Where have you been? What are you up to? And not having a a good answer. Like, oh, well, I've been drinking, or oh, I've been depressed. And so I stepped out. I think it was from October to February where I was just not willing to come to terms with it.
Yeah. So you were done with church, and you were done with, I guess, in a sense, with God. You're like, you didn't bless my efforts, and you were drinking a lot to drown out the pain.
Yeah.
Like, what was your interrelationship with your mother, with maybe other Christians? Like, did your mother try to reach out, bring you back? Did other people try to reach out to you?
No. So my mom, bless her, she just prayed. She's just always prayed for her kids and that we do the right thing in the eyes of the Lord. And she was just always there, you know? And so it was a lot of fighting, a lot of bickering, a lot of mean words back and forth of, well, why are you dressing this way? Or why are you out this late? And like, you have responsibilities, like you have your job. And
so you're still living at home?
I was. Oh yeah.
She let you stay? Oh, that's a loving mom.
No. She let me stay. She's. I mean, I'll give that to her that she's even though she's obviously never been okay with our lifestyle, she's always had her doors open to us, like of her home, and so. That's something that I've always appreciated from her, that I have a safe place to come home to. And so, but no, it was a lot of fighting on Saturdays. There was a couple times where I'd roll right into like my room, and then I'd just change quickly and then go to church and then leave and then just head out again. That was when I was like in the beginning when I was still kind of willing to go, and then I just stopped.
When you stopped going.
But when it came to church, no one really was interested in reaching out as to, well, we have like a missing sheep, if you so will. No. So that did hurt. That, you know, because up until that moment, there was talks about, there's always talks that we need to go reach out to the youth that have left, the members that have left. But then when it comes to the nitty and gritty of it, like, nope, it's not something someone wants to do. It's just a lot of work.
So that you kind of felt, I guess, lonely in that period. Your boyfriend left, you feel like God left. Yeah. You're fighting with your mother, and then the church is saying we should reach out to the youth, but no one's reaching out to you.
Yeah, no one's reaching out, but they're interested in what you're doing. They want to know. They want, comment on that, but not interested enough to reach out.
That's tough. Like that sounds like a really dark 6 months. So like what was the catalyst that brought you back, that made you look up to God and be like, I need you in my life now, despite all the hurt and the pain? Like, I need you.
I realized the pain wasn't going away, but I was still like stubborn or weak to step away from that lifestyle. What I guess turned me back was in March of 2022. A friend, like a school childhood friend, like he committed suicide, and so some sort of like survivor's guilt was creeping in of like, well, like, why am I still here? Like, I didn't want to be here, but I'm still here. And then that was in March. So in February, what it was is I was out drinking one night, and I made the bad decision of driving home. And I blacked out. There's a good maybe 10, 15 miles of where I have no recollection of.
Wow.
And so I come to because I don't exactly, no. So I'm passed out in my car, and I am on one side of the freeway, and I just like go and cross the hole to the other side of the freeway, and I crash into the median. My tire pops, and somehow I wake up, but then I keep driving.
Wait, you passed out on one side of the road, crashed into the median, and woke up on the other side, and then kept driving.
I kept driving because I didn't want to hit the brakes. That's what I wanted to do. When I came to and I woke up and I realized, I was like, oh my gosh.
You almost died.
I almost died. My tires my tires popped. I'm like eating the rim out. I don't want to hit the brakes because I know that I'll just swerve and I don't know who's behind me. I'll hit someone. And so I'm like trying to hit the brakes. I'm trying to slow down, but then at the same time, I'm really drunk. So I thought I was hitting the brakes, but I really wasn't.
Right.
And so that's really what circles me back. I think that's like my pivoting point of where like, all right, Patsy, like we could have died.
So
we should have technically. Like,
I mean, that's a miracle that you didn't get hit by any other cars when you passed out and literally crossed the other side of the freeway. Like that's insane.
You know, thankfully, and like, you know, it's God. That's the only answer that I can give you. There was a couple behind me that they actually called 911. And they are reporting like a drunk driver. She's swerving. She's going to the other side of the freeway. She crashed, whatever. She keeps driving. And then actually like in the freeway in Phoenix, like where I'm at, just up ahead of me, the next exit is either to keep going or on the right side is a huge like bridge connecting over to our other like freeways.
Wow.
And so if I think if I would not have swerved, I would have made it onto that bridge eventually, because that was like the next three exits down. And so that's kind of when I had to make myself some like really serious questions, like, okay, well, you wanted to like commit suicide for so long. It's something that's like been at the back of your mind, like you almost did die. Like, do you really want to? Is that something that you really did want? And
were you asking yourself that night?
Yeah.
So like, what happened? Like, how did you get off the road?
Well, there was another person that actually she started to drive up next to me, and then eventually she goes in front of my car.
Okay.
And I don't hit her.
Okay.
She's fine. She's safe. But
you finally found the brakes?
I finally found the brakes. Yeah. I come to a stop, but actually the couple that had called, initially, they actually say that, I guess in like the 911 call is, well, the driver, she's passed out, but there's someone in there with her. There's a man in there with her. There was no one in the car with me.
No, that's wild.
I didn't take anyone home with me.
Right.
My friend, she had thankfully, well, I thought she was a friend at the time. She wasn't, which is okay, you know.
Happens.
Yeah, but she had not come home with me that night, thankfully. But so
they were saying there was someone in the car with you.
Yeah.
But that's God.
Yeah, that's God. I like to believe so. I like to believe that it was God.
I mean, she's saying it.
Yeah.
Emphatically, it sounds like. But you're saying no one came. There's no one in the car with you.
There was absolutely. I know. Like there was. I come to and like all I have is like my shoes, some clothes, my purse, and like there's no one in the car. And so I come to ask myself these questions like, well,
that's crazy. Clearly
there was someone with you in the car. And, you know, you've been saying for so long now, it's been like a voice in the back of your head that you've wanted to die, like since you were 16. And here you had the chance to do so. Yeah. And you were saved from it. How do you feel? Like, did you actually really want to die? And it's coming to the realization, well, no, I guess I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to end. I just wanted that suffering to be gone and to just feel like I was living.
So you go home that night. What do you do?
No. So I was actually booked that night.
Oh, you were booked. Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
The police show up to the scene. They show up. That's a whole other like triggering thing as well. I don't.
Yeah, that's okay. You don't have to get.
Yeah. So.
You got booked.
My brother like bails me. Well, no, I was just released to my brother.
Okay.
And so he takes me home, and I I call out of work for that day, like, I'm sick, I won't be able to come in today. And that's just kind of where it all starts, where I'm deciding to make amends with myself, with God, and with the church and my feelings.
All right. So tell me about that journey when the light starts piercing the darkness. Like,
Yeah.
tell me about that journey after the incident.
Well, it's one like early morning. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I wake my mom up. Like, okay, mom, I give in. Okay, like I had been tossing, turning that all night, and I gave in. And I tell her, okay, I'll go to church on Saturday, but I'm not taking off my earrings. And if I want to, I'll go in pants. And if I want to, I'll be late. And kind of setting up my own like rules of, well, I will, but if I can do this.
These are your rules of
Yeah.
engagement.
Yeah.
If you're gonna want
Yeah.
me, if I'm
Yeah.
gonna go back to church, these are my stipulations.
Yeah, kind of something like that. And she's like, okay. And I was expecting a rebuttal or like a fight or something, and she just goes, okay. Like, oh, well, that was easy. Okay. And so that's where it kind of just all starts. You know, I start going back just as who I am with what I like to dress as and what I like to wear. And I then realized that, well, who are these people to deny me entry into your house of worship? And, you know, they might be they are dealing with things just like I am. Theirs just might be a lot more private and well hidden.
It just
than
hasn't been
mine.
found out yet.
Yeah.
You know, there's no perfect person in the church.
Yeah, and so it really came down to that where I said, screw it. I don't care. I don't care what they'll say. I don't care if my sins are more outward or more open than yours. I still deserve to be at church. I still deserve to be there.
Yeah, no, that's a fact. I mean, I was speaking earlier to the producer, and it's like the church has a bunch of fallen people. Like, we're all broken. If we weren't broken, we wouldn't need a savior. We wouldn't be a church, a body of believers who all acknowledge, hey, that we need God in our lives because we can't do this thing right, you know? And obviously, there's this tension always with self and surrendering to God. And like, hey, there's always that tension. I want to do this, but that's not what's for my flourishing. God wants this for my life. But it's like, who do I follow today? Is it self or is it God? Is it self or is it God? And obviously that is clearly present in your story. Even from your upbringing up until then, obviously your view of God is absent. Didn't make it easier for you to fall in relationship with him, because like I feel like I don't have one with him already. So it's like I'm gonna find closeness and relationship and all these other things. So you go back to church the first day. What was that like?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I guess it just hasn't really been all as bad as I make it up in my head to be. But I don't remember that Saturday back, but I know the question of, oh, well, where have you been? But it's like, well, this is Saturday. This is like the end of the week. You haven't asked me at all, like all week. You have my number. You could have texted me. You could have called me.
Yeah.
But there is I guess like one or two people that they did. They're actually my friend's dad. He was someone that he would check in. He would just call to ask, like, how are you doing? Are you okay? Like, is there anything I can help you with? And I think he's been pivotal and or I guess a good church person in my mind. We're like, well, he's cared, but I think as a whole, if I will say that it was very absent. But coming back, I've taken it day by day, and there's highs when there's like a youth retreat, or if I've had a good week, or again, like I'm trying to leave like that transactional like system behind, but it's still very
tough. It's tough when that's when you've been used to, where it's like, I do this, then God will do this for me. And I think I posted on Melissa's post a couple days ago regarding we were talking about the 10 Commandments and obedience and rule following, and how sometimes, especially as like Christians in general, but like especially as Adventists, sometimes we can be a little bit more legalistic, and because we have a high view of the law, which is a great thing, but I think it's so high that we miss the the point, you know,
Yeah,
which is it's the
yeah,
spirit of the
yeah.
law, and it's not necessarily doing these X, Y, and Z, so this can produce that, you know. And I think it's hard. It takes a while to leave that, because we also live in a very transactional world,
Yeah.
right? Nothing in this world is given without something being taken, you know. So when you bring that into space, and when that's your view of God for so long, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, I think especially at this age, you know, like as youth, like we're still trying to find ourselves and like our identity, and like having to be worried on top of it, like legalistic or like not biblical like teachings. It's
Yeah.
hard, you know. And so I guess now for me it's really come down to, well, sure, I go to church on Sabbath, sure, I try to keep the commandments, but I'm a little bit more worried with trying to build a relationship with God than as opposed to if I'm keeping
Amen.
all 10 of the commandments.
And that's where it should be. It starts with relationship, because if you're not in a relationship, then what's the point,
Yeah.
right? It's you as Christians, you don't want to live a life of ought but want. It's like,
Yeah.
I love God, I'm in a relationship, so I want to spend time with him on the Sabbath. I won't commit adultery. I won't steal because I don't want to do these things.
Yeah.
Whereas like I ought to keep
Yeah.
the Sabbath. I ought to not steal. I ought to not. So then it becomes more of a rigorous thing, you know?
Yeah.
And then you start conflating that with other things like wearing pants versus skirts. Is this a sin or is this a commandment?
Yeah.
So again, it becomes very stressful on your
Yeah.
mental. And like you mentioned, like in this culture, and we have so many things coming from outside, and you have this come from inside.
Yeah.
And while you're growing and trying to figure out where your place is and all of that, it can definitely lead to that, what your experience.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. And I think, you know, for me, I don't know how like controversial this might sound. I know my mom doesn't like it, but
Go for it. We're here for
me,
it.
like I feel like religion or just your interpretation of it is subjective, is relative. You know, at the end of the day, we all serve, I feel like, or want to serve the same God, and we all belong to the same God. But at the end of the day, it's what you interpret. It's what you feel is right based on what you're reading, but it's based on what you're experiencing. And you know, if I'm doing something wrong, like I'll have to take it up with the Lord when I meet him, you know? Like it's not, I feel like we just take it so personal, like other people's lives, and like no, like I'm supposed to tell you not to do these things and that you're living the wrong way. And like sure we are, you know, like we're supposed to be
there's accountability, sure, but we can't play the role of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, their truth by nature is exclusive, right? Truth is, as believers, if we think about truth in the biblical sense, is a person. It's Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So like if he's real, then, and if he's Lord, then I have to follow everything he says. You know, that's the logical trajectory of that. So I would say Jesus is not subjective but objective, because he's a person and he's truth and he's God in the flesh. Take it from there. But when it comes to, I think there are primary issues and secondary issues. And a lot of the things, the earrings, the dress, and what you eat, you know, those are all secondary, even maybe tertiary issues. And not the primary. The primary issue is like, do you have a relationship with Jesus?
But I didn't see it as an option then.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. It's not presented that way. We're like, yes, Jesus is important. Like our first episode, we interviewed the pastor of my church, and he was like, you know, like, yes, Jesus is important. Like he was talking about his upbringing, but he was like here to the side, and then all these other things took precedent in your upbringing. And that's kind of what I saw growing up, and I'm sure that's probably what you've seen, because you're like, you didn't even have that as an option.
But even then, that's hard, coming to terms with that. Just recently, a big... so I eventually want to go to school to study educational psychology, and my big thing, I guess, in the Hispanic world is discipline and how it is physical. And so I don't believe in it. But then I was coming from a like biased point of view, just because I didn't want to read what the Bible said, because I had like the gist of it over like, well, it's biblical, Ellen G. White says and blah blah blah, whatever. So then I give in. I'm like, you're right. I am coming from a biased opinion. I don't like that you're right on that, so I will read about it. And so then I do read about it, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, what people say is right. It is in the Bible. It is something that Ellen G. White teaches, but it's not a salvation issue. But then that's hard. Coming to terms with, well, technically I'm going against with a teaching or what is like an ecclesiastic law, if you will.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed it. What specific teaching or discipline?
Discipline. We're like, oh well, it's biblical. At least that's what I.
Oh, like the idea of discipline,
Yeah.
being disciplined.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, of course it's a biblical idea, but I would say that's like a human idea. Like if you want something, say you want to buy a house, right? And you got to get your finances over, you have to be disciplined with it. But it starts here though. It's like, I want to do this, so I'm not going to, less Uber Eats, less Ubers, less takeout.
Well, I think what it comes from, where it stems from, is like spare the rod. Spare
oh,
the
you
rod,
mean that kind of discipline?
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
See, so
like physical,
you mean discipline, like punishment?
No.
Oh, that's a whole other.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you just meant like self-discipline.
Oh no. No.
That type of discipline. Okay, yeah. Whether it's you should be corporal punishment, spanking, or if you just talk to someone or yell at them.
Yeah.
That's
a whole other topic.
That's a whole other topic.
That's something that has always really bothered me. Like, hopefully, like, God willing, like, as a future mom, sometime, if that's in God's plans. It's something that I've never believed in, or something that I've never wanted to do. And so coming to terms with that, well, I can choose not to do that and still know that, it's in the Bible, or it's LGY. It's like, well,
yes, it's one of those tertiary issues, right? It's one of those secondary issues.
Yeah.
Like, Caribbean household, I got beaten. It's like spanking growing up. I never end up in jail, didn't have a baby out of wedlock. It worked for me. But, these kids are bred different these days. So I don't know. But just to circle back to your story, right? So you started going back to church, you're rebuilding that relationship. That was, a year ago? So not too long ago?
Not too long ago, no. In 2022, February of 2022 was the accident, and then that's kind of when I start jumping.
Okay, so my question to you, as we're wrapping up, like, where's your relationship today with God and with the church?
With God, I think it is still in the works, and it will always be in the works. I feel like there's never like an ending, like, oh, I've graduated from my relationship with God, we're great,
Yeah, sure.
But I think it is a lot better, and I'm a lot more open to what he has to tell me and what he wants of me in my life. I do find myself reaching for my Bible more, reaching for books more, reaching for just Bible content, as opposed to just shutting it all out. With the church, I think that is my answer. Like, I don't know. I think it's still very broken, but I do think that it is maybe that specific church now.
Right. Not more so the larger body.
The larger body. Yeah, I'm not too into like the big like meeting they have every so often. Like I'm not too into that. I don't understand it, but at the same time I don't really care about it. I'm more worried with my relationship with God at this moment to be worried with what
the organization
President Wilson is.
Yeah. No, I understand. Like, I feel the same way. That's good. So that's real, and I appreciate that answer. It's like it's still a work in progress with your relationship with Jesus, your relationship with the church, well, specifically your local community of believers. It's still fractured, but it's a work in progress. And I think it's good to be honest about that. And I like that we've had a few episodes where it's still being resolved. It's not a story, well, I'm back and I'm flourishing and we're doing this. It's like, no, like, I'm still working through that. Like, some days I still don't like them, and that's real. Like, we're real people. You experience shame from the church body. You experience neglect. People didn't listen to you, and, people weren't reaching out for you when you left the household of faith, into the world. So I think that's a really honest answer. And I just want to ask you a question. Like, what advice would you give to someone that is going through what you went through right now?
I would say it sounds super cliche, and like I think we all have said that in each episode. We all like end with like, well, it sounds cliche, but it's true. Like it really is just keep trying. That's it. That's all it is. I would say if it is your thing and it is something that you do want to try again, I'd say give the church another chance. Because it wasn't God who hurt you. It was the church. It was worldly people. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, we also need to offer the same grace that we so just boldly ask of God.
That's true.
So, I don't know what the people that have given me such a hard time in church, I don't know what they're going through. I don't know what their upbringing is. And, you know, most of the time I don't remember what I'm saying right now when I'm mad at them. But at the end of the day is I don't know what they're going through for them to be treating me the way that they are. And so I do try to just keep that in mind that, well, they deserve grace from me just as much as I deserve, or not deserve, but need the grace from God. But I would just say, just look for a different church, you know, like if you don't like the church you're going to, look for a different one. Look for friends that are willing to help you, willing to like, or I guess just like an accountable buddy. Like that's what I kind of have attached myself to now, like friends that I think that might be going through the same thing, or that like they have been just as honest with me. And so it's like, well, let's go to church, like, or let's go to this activity. Let's go to like just be more like Christ-centered. And so that's what my advice would be. Just look for another church. Try to be gracious to the people that have hurt you, just because I mean, they're all so hurting.
Yeah, that's good.
That's it. Yeah.
And then any resources that helped you that you would recommend to someone who's
therapy and medication. Yeah.
Therapy and
sometimes
medication.
They go hand in hand, you know. Sometimes
you should clarify medication.
Oh, well, like prescribed, like
okay.
legally prescribed by your therapist or psychologist.
Okay.
Yes. No, not auto prescribing. No, that's not good.
We're for therapy. Jesus in therapy. We always say it on this
Jesus
podcast.
In therapy. Yep.
Okay.
I think those would be my resources. Just finding a good therapist. I love my therapist now. She's amazing. And
is she a Seventh-day Adventist Christian?
She's not.
Okay.
But most of her professors when she was in college were Adventists.
Oh wow.
So she was very respectful of my
That's awesome.
beliefs.
That's good. Well, listen, Patsy, thank you for sharing your story. I was not expecting a lot of that. After I read the outline, I was like, okay, let's see what this brings. This is not what I was expecting, but like thank you so much for sharing it, for being vulnerable and to being real, that even today you're still working it out, you know? And I think it's good for people to hear that you can still be working it out. Like you can still have issues with the church and still be attending it, or maybe you stop attending, but you're trying to build your relationship with God. Like all of it's fine. I don't think we should ever confuse someone's disinterest in going to their local body with their disinterest in God. And I think your relationship with God is more important, primary, and then your attendance at a physical building, a location. But thank you so much for coming to New York and for sharing your story. And I just hope whoever's listening will be blessed by this.
No, thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing and like having this safe space for us.
You're very welcome.
Very helpful. And I hope and I pray that, you know, the right people hear from this podcast.
That is my hope and my prayer. All right, guys, that's another episode of the Church Hurt Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram at Church Hurt Podcast. It would be much appreciated. Thank you so much and have a good one. Peace.